she was late to the wedding, but little did she know it was the moment that would change her life forever. A millionaire caught her gaze from across the room, and an undeniable connection sparked between them. Could love truly conquer the boundaries of wealth and status? Keep reading to find out. Before we dive into this story, if you're new to my channel, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Stay updated on all my latest stories and exciting content. Now let's get into this emotional roller coaster of love, suspense, and twists. The wedding hall gleamed with opulence, chandeliers sparkling above as laughter and chatter echoed around the room. Guests mingled in tailored suits and elegant gowns, each one more refined than the next, as the air buzzed with the anticipation of the celebration. Zayn, the millionaire and guest of honor, stood at the center of it all. Tall, handsome, and every inch the powerful businessman he was, he commanded attention without even trying. His eyes, dark with intensity, scanned the crowd, but they lacked the warmth one would expect from someone so successful. Despite his position in society, there was an emptiness behind his smile that even the finest silk suit couldn't hide. Zayn had everything: wealth, fame, the admiration of many. But when he looked around at the faces around him, something felt missing. The conversations he had were always surface level, filled with meaningless compliments and rehearsed pleasantries. There was no substance, no real connection. Zayn longed for something real, something genuine. Yet no one seemed to understand the longing that stirred deep within him. Then the door opened. She entered the room like a soft breeze on a summer evening, an unexpected presence among the crowd. Amira had rushed from work, her clothes slightly wrinkled, and her hair pulled back in an elegant but hurried knot. She wasn't dressed in a lavish gown or jewelry. Instead, she wore a modest dress, a quiet expression on her face as she tried to blend into the background. Her late arrival was the result of her busy schedule, a constant juggle between work and life. But tonight, as she walked into the grand ballroom, Amira felt like an outsider in a world of perfection she didn't belong to. The moment she stepped inside, she regretted it. The glimmering smiles, the expensive gowns, the chatter of wealth, all seemed to mock her modest existence. Her shoes clicked against the marble floor as she hurried to find a seat at the back, hoping to remain unnoticed. But as she moved, her eyes met his. Zayn's gaze locked onto hers, and in that moment, everything else in the room seemed to fade away. Amira's heart skipped a beat as she quickly looked away, not ready to face the intensity in his eyes. She didn't belong in this world, and certainly not in his presence. She wasn't the kind of woman who would catch the eye of someone like him. Powerful, wealthy, and clearly accustomed to women with much more to offer than she could ever give. Yet Zayn couldn't take his eyes off her. There was something about her that intrigued him, something raw and genuine in her presence that made everything else seem shallow. The intrigue was almost immediate, but Zayn didn't understand why. She was nothing like the women he was used to, women who sought his attention for status or wealth. No, this woman had an air of quiet humility that both baffled and fascinated him. His world was so full of distractions, but in that brief moment of eye contact, he felt a spark of curiosity, something he had never felt before. The evening seemed to stretch out endlessly for Amira, the weight of the wedding's extravagance settling heavily on her shoulders. She tried her best to blend into the crowd, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place. The laughter and conversation around her only reminded her of how far removed her life was from the world of luxury and privilege that surrounded her. She had always known her place, working 2 jobs, struggling to make ends meet, doing everything she could to support her family. But tonight, her late arrival and the grandeur of the event left her feeling smaller than ever. As she made her way through the room, her gaze met Zayn's once again. This time, he didn't look away. His piercing eyes stayed locked on hers, and for a moment, Amira felt her heart race in a way she hadn't anticipated. She quickly turned her head, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. She had to remind herself that men like Zayn didn't notice women like her. He was the kind of man who had everything: wealth, power, and a life filled with the finest things. She was just a simple girl, struggling to get by. There was no way someone like him would be interested in someone like her. But as the evening wore on, Amira began to feel the pull of his gaze once again. She couldn't ignore it, even though she desperately wanted to. She kept telling herself that it was just curiosity, that he was probably just looking for someone to entertain him for the night. But there was something about the way Zayn watched her. It wasn't the usual disinterest or boredom she was accustomed to from wealthy men. His attention was focused not just on her appearance, but on something deeper, something intangible that she couldn't quite understand. The moment came when they spoke, the first real interaction between them. Amira had taken a seat at the back, hoping to remain unnoticed, but Zayn approached her with a confident stride, his presence impossible to ignore. He stood there for a moment, studying her with an expression that was both curious and intrigued. "May I sit?" he asked, his voice smooth, yet carrying an undertone of warmth. Amira looked up, startled, unsure how to respond. She had hoped to avoid conversation altogether, but something in his gaze made her hesitate before turning him away. Sure," she replied, her voice soft. She motioned to the empty chair beside her, trying to calm the racing thoughts in her mind. She couldn't help but feel a flutter in her chest, though she quickly told herself to stay composed. This was just a chance encounter, and nothing more. Zayn sat down, his presence next to her, suddenly making her feel conscious of every movement she made. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The music played softly in the background, the sounds of laughter and chatter from the other guests filling the space between them. "I don't think I've seen you here before," Zayn said finally, breaking the silence. Amira stiffened, unsure of what to say. She wasn't sure how to explain her presence at the event. She didn't belong here, not in the way Zayn and his friends did. "I'm, a friend of the bride," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Zayn raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by her response. "A friend of the bride? You don't look like you're from this world," he said, his voice gentle but pointed. No offense, of course. Amira felt a sharp pang in her chest. She didn't belong in this world. She knew that. But hearing it aloud from him felt like a sting, even if it wasn't meant to be hurtful. "I'm just different," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not used to places like this." Zayn's gaze softened, and for a moment there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Understanding, perhaps? He leaned back in his chair, studying her intently. "I get that," he said, his tone thoughtful. "This world can be overwhelming at times, but it's not as real as people think." Amira frowned, unsure what he meant. "What do you mean?" Zayn hesitated for a moment, as though considering his words carefully. "It's all a facade. People here, they wear their wealth like armor, but beneath it all, they're just as lost as anyone else." Amira blinked, surprised by his openness. She had expected him to be just another rich man looking for some attention, but there was something different about him. Something that made her curious, despite herself. Zayn smiled, a small, almost sad smile. "Sometimes it takes someone like you to remind me of what's real." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Amira was at a loss for what to say. She didn't understand why Zayn would be so open with her, a woman he barely knew. But there was an undeniable warmth in his gaze, an honesty that caught her off guard. Before she could respond, Zayn stood up. "I'll leave you to enjoy the evening, but it was nice to meet you, Amira." Amira nodded, still processing the unexpected conversation. As he walked away, she couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. Her heart was racing, but she couldn't tell if it was from nervousness, excitement, or something deeper. Something she didn't want to acknowledge. The days that followed the wedding were a whirlwind for Amira. She tried to focus on her work, her family, and her responsibilities, but the memory of Zayn's piercing gaze and their brief conversation lingered in her thoughts. She had never met anyone like him. Despite his wealth and the world he lived in, there was something about him that seemed different from the others. He had a depth that intrigued her, a vulnerability she hadn't expected. The way he had spoken about the world he inhabited, as though he saw through its glittering surface and into the emptiness beneath, made her wonder if there was more to him than the image he projected. Zayn, on the other hand, couldn't shake the memory of Amira. The way she had looked at him, hesitant yet full of quiet strength, had struck him harder than he expected. He had been around the world, seen it all, experienced the best that money could offer. Yet he had never felt such a genuine connection with someone. There was no pretense in her, no desire to impress him with her appearance or her wealth. She was just herself. And that, more than anything, had drawn him in. He tried to forget her. He buried himself in his work, attended the social events that came with his status, and interacted with people who fit perfectly into his world. But every time he walked into a room, he found himself scanning the crowd, hoping to see her. It was maddening. He didn't even know why it mattered so much. He'd never been this intrigued by someone before. The next time they saw each other was entirely by chance. Zayn was at a charity event for one of his business ventures when, from across the room, his gaze landed on her, Amira. She was standing near the refreshment table, talking to a few people, her face lit up with a smile as she laughed at something one of them had said. Zayn felt his heart race. He couldn't help it. She looked so out of place in the glamorous crowd, yet somehow she shone in a way that everyone else seemed to fade into the background. Without thinking, he walked over to her. This time, he didn't wait for her to approach him. He needed to speak to her again. "Amira," he said, his voice carrying easily over the chatter in the room. She turned, startled, before her eyes widened in recognition. "Zayn," she replied, her voice soft, as though she couldn't quite believe he was standing before her. Her heart raced at the sight of him, the same feeling she had experienced at the wedding flooding her chest again. She hadn't expected to see him again, let alone in a place like this. "I didn't expect to find you here," Zayn said, offering her a warm smile. "This isn't exactly your usual crowd, is it?" Amira chuckled nervously, her eyes darting around the room. "No, definitely not, but I'm here for work. You know, helping out with the event?" Zayn raised an eyebrow, impressed. "Of course you are. You always seem to be doing something worthwhile." Amira blushed slightly, unsure of how to respond. She wasn't used to people giving her compliments, especially not someone like him. But his words didn't feel empty or patronizing. There was sincerity in his tone, and that made her pause. "I didn't expect to see you either," she said after a beat, trying to shift the focus away from her own discomfort. What brings you here?" Zayn shrugged. "Just doing my part, you know, but I'm glad I ran into you again." Amira glanced up at him, surprised by how easily they fell into conversation. It was strange how comfortable she felt around him. She had never really been able to talk to people like this, people who lived in a different world than hers. But with Zayn, everything felt different. They talked for a while longer, the conversation flowing naturally. Zayn didn't press her on the details of her life, and Amira didn't feel the need to explain her struggles or insecurities. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a connection that neither could deny. As they spoke, Amira found herself laughing more freely than she had in a long time. Zayn made her forget about the weight of her responsibilities, even if only for a moment. When the event began to wind down, Zayn found himself reluctant to leave her side. There was something about Amira that made him feel like he was finally being seen for who he truly was. Not for his wealth, not for his status, but for the person he was beneath all of that. "I should go," Amira said reluctantly, glancing at her watch. "I still have a few things to take care of." Zayn nodded, though he didn't want the conversation to end. "I understand, but Amira, maybe we could meet again sometime? Just to talk, no pressure, no charity events, just us." Amira hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure what this meant or where it was going, but the thought of spending more time with him, of getting to know him better, made something inside her stir. "I'd like that," she said softly, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. And just like that, without even realizing it, they had crossed a line. Neither of them knew it yet, but their worlds had already started to shift. After their second meeting, things between Zayn and Amira began to change, though neither of them were fully aware of the depth of the shift. They continued meeting for coffee or walks in the park, sometimes for hours at a time, talking about everything and nothing. The more they got to know each other, the stronger the connection became. Zayn began to realize that Amira was unlike anyone he had ever known. She was grounded, compassionate, and driven, someone who didn't care about his money or status. She was genuine, something that was so rare in his world. Her laughter became the highlight of his day, and the moments they shared felt like a reprieve from the pressures of his life. But the more Zayn became involved with Amira, the more he struggled with the conflict between his world and hers. His friends and colleagues began to notice his growing attachment to her, and the whispers started. "Why her?" they'd ask. "She's just another girl from the wrong side of the tracks." Zayn's world was one of privilege and exclusivity. Everyone he knew shared a common bond of wealth and status. They had been raised to think that money defined worth, and that the love of someone lesser was an illusion. At first, Zayn tried to ignore the judgment, but the pressure from his friends and family started to weigh on him. They would question his decisions, mock his interest in a woman who didn't fit into their world. "Why waste your time with someone who will never fit in with us?" his best friend Mark said one night over drinks. "She's just going to drag you down." Zayn's frustration grew as he tried to balance the expectations of his world with his own feelings for Amira. He had never been one to care much for societal pressures, but the constant bombardment from those around him made him question everything. He began to pull back, unsure of how to proceed. The insecurity and self-doubt crept in. Maybe his friends were right. Maybe he was being foolish. Maybe Amira, with her modest background and her world so far removed from his, wouldn't be able to understand the complexities of his life. Amira, on the other hand, began to sense the distance. She could feel Zayn pulling away, though he never said anything explicitly. He became more distant in their conversations, his responses shorter, and his presence less certain. She couldn't figure out why he was acting this way, especially after all the time they had spent together. It was as though he was torn between two worlds, his and hers, and neither was good enough for him. One evening, after a week of hardly hearing from him, Amira finally called him. "Zain, what's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling with the frustration she had kept inside. "You've been distant. I thought we were getting closer, but now it feels like you're shutting me out." Zain, who had been quiet on the other end of the line, sighed deeply. "Amira, it's not that simple," he began, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "I care about you, but what?" Amira interrupted, her heart pounding in her chest. "But you can't be with me because I'm not rich enough, because I don't belong to your world?" Zain winced at the accusation, though it was a fair one. "No, that's not it," he said, running a hand through his hair. "It's just, everything's different now. People are talking. They don't understand. I'm starting to wonder if I do." Amira's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected this. She thought that what they had was real. But now it seemed like the walls of their worlds were too high to scale. She had always been aware of the gap between their lives, but she had hoped that love could transcend that. Yet, in that moment, it became clear that Zain was struggling with the very thing she had feared the most. "I see," Amira said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. "Maybe you're right. Maybe it's better if we just stop." "Amira, wait." Zain's voice cracked as he tried to salvage the situation, but she cut him off. "I don't want to be someone you feel ashamed of, Zain. I don't want to be in a relationship where I'm constantly second-guessing my worth. If I'm not enough for you because I'm not part of your world, then maybe it's best we let it go." The line went silent for a moment. Zain wanted to protest, to explain that it wasn't about her, but the words didn't come. Instead, he heard the faint click of Amira hanging up the phone. The days after the phone call were some of the hardest Zain had ever faced. He could barely focus on his work, his mind constantly drifting back to the conversation with Amira. He missed her laugh, the warmth she brought into the room, the way she made him feel like he wasn't just another millionaire among a crowd of people who only saw him for his wealth. She had been a breath of fresh air in a world full of pretense, and now that she was gone, everything felt suffocating. Zain spent his nights replaying their last conversation, trying to find the words he should have said. He realized how deeply he had misunderstood everything. The pressure from his friends and family, the constant judgment from people who had never understood him, had clouded his judgment. But when he thought about Amira, everything became clear. She had been the only person who saw him for who he truly was, not for his money or his status. And in that moment of clarity, Zain knew he had made the biggest mistake of his life. Amira, on the other hand, was struggling in her own way. She had always known the realities of life, that love wasn't always easy, that people from different worlds often didn't work out. But with Zain, it had felt different. She had allowed herself to dream of a future with him, to imagine a life where their differences didn't matter. But now, reality had come crashing down. She couldn't force someone to love her in a way that went against everything they had known. If Zain wasn't ready to embrace her world, then maybe it was time to let go. Despite the pain, Amira threw herself back into her work and her family. She kept herself busy, convincing herself that it was for the best. She wasn't the kind of person who wasted time on something that wasn't meant to be. And yet, there were moments when she would catch herself thinking of him. His smile, his laugh, the way he looked at her with a mix of curiosity and understanding. Those moments haunted her, and for the first time in a long time, Amira found herself wishing for something more. One night, after a particularly exhausting day, Amira was on her way home when her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but there was something about it that made her stomach flip. She hesitated for a moment, then picked up the phone. "Amira?" came the familiar voice on the other end. Her heart skipped a beat. It was Zain. "Zain?" she asked, surprised and a little unsure of what to expect. "What is it?" "I know I messed up," he said immediately, his voice raw, almost desperate. "I've been an idiot. I've been listening to everyone around me, letting them tell me what's right. But the truth is, I don't care about their opinions. I care about you." Amira felt her breath catch in her throat. She had tried to move on, to convince herself that Zain was just another person who couldn't see beyond their differences. But hearing his voice, hearing the sincerity in his words, made everything she had tried to bury come rushing back. "I don't know what you want from me, Zain," she said quietly. "You pushed me away, and now you expect me to just forget that." "I'm not asking you to forget," Zain replied, his voice filled with urgency. "I'm asking you to give me another chance. I'm asking you to trust me. I can't go another day without trying to make this right." Amira was silent for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. She had wanted to hear this, but part of her was still scared. Scared of getting hurt again, scared of being pushed aside when things got tough. But the truth was, she missed him. She missed the person he had been when they first met, the way he made her feel like she wasn't invisible, like she mattered. "I don't know if I can just forget what happened, Zain," she said softly. "But I also don't want to lose you. I just need to know that this time you're really in it, that you're not going to let the world dictate what we have." Zain was quiet for a moment, then he spoke, his voice steady and sincere. "Amira, I don't care about the world anymore. I care about us. I care about you. And I'm not going to let anyone or anything come between that. I'm willing to fight for us if you are." The sincerity in his words, the vulnerability in his voice, made Amira's heart race. She had been afraid that their love couldn't survive the pressures of their worlds. But now, in this moment, she realized that Zain was willing to make the choice, to fight for her, to fight for them. And that was all she needed to hear. "I'm scared, Zain," she whispered. "I don't want to get hurt." "I know," he said gently, "and I'll never hurt you. I promise." The words hung in the air between them, a promise, a declaration. It wasn't going to be easy, and they both knew that. There would be challenges ahead, obstacles they would need to overcome. But in that moment, with the vulnerability they both shared, it felt like anything was possible. "I'm willing to try," Amira said finally, her voice soft but full of hope. "But this time, it's on our terms, not anyone else's." Zain's relief was palpable, and a smile tugged at his lips. "On our terms, Amira, I promise." And just like that, the walls that had once stood between them began to crumble. They weren't going to let the world define their love. They were going to build something real, something that didn't rely on money or status, but on trust, love, and understanding. It was going to be a difficult journey, but they were both ready to take that first step together. The days after their conversation were filled with an uneasy calm. Zain and Amira slowly began to rebuild the trust that had been shaken between them. Zain, in his pursuit of Amira, was determined to prove that his feelings for her were real. He made a conscious effort to step away from the world that had once dictated his every move. For the first time, he made decisions based on what felt right, not what was expected of him. He started spending more time in places that had once felt foreign to him, quiet cafes, parks, and even community centers where Amira volunteered. These were not the glamorous locations he was used to, but they brought him closer to Amira, and that was all that mattered. Amira, too, felt herself starting to trust him again, though it wasn't easy. She had been hurt before, and she knew that giving herself fully to someone meant risking her heart. But the way Zayn had shown up for her, how he had listened to her needs and fears without judgment, made her believe in the possibility of a love that wasn't defined by wealth or status. Slowly, her walls began to come down. She started to believe that they could make this work, that love could truly transcend all the differences between them. But just as things seemed to be getting better, the world they had tried to escape came crashing back into their lives. Zayn's friends, particularly Mark, were the first to notice the change in him. They didn't like it. "What is this? You're spending all your time with her, ignoring the things that matter," Mark confronted him one evening at one of their usual gatherings. "Amira matters to me," Zayn replied firmly, trying to keep his emotions in check. Mark scoffed. "She's just a distraction, Zayn. You can't throw away everything you've worked for because of some girl from the wrong side of town. What does she even bring to your life? She doesn't fit in here. She doesn't fit with you." Zayn's heart clenched as Mark's words hit him, but he didn't back down. "She's real. She's everything this world isn't. I don't care what anyone thinks anymore, Mark. Amira is the only person who's ever made me feel like I'm not just a figure in a business deal." Mark's face twisted in disbelief. "You're throwing it all away for this? You've changed, Zayn, and I don't like it." Zayn was quiet for a moment. The weight of his decisions was pressing down on him, but he knew there was no turning back. He had made his choice. "I'm not throwing anything away, I'm finding something real, and if you can't understand that, then maybe I need to rethink our friendship." Mark's expression soured, and he didn't say another word. Zayn knew that by choosing Amira, he was cutting ties with a part of his old life. He was risking everything, but he was willing to do so if it meant being with her. The pressure from his social circle, his friends, and even his family began to mount. Zayn's parents, who had always been proud of his success, were less than pleased when they found out how serious he was about Amira. "You can't be serious about this, Zayn," his mother said, her voice filled with concern. "She's not the kind of woman we want for you. You need someone who understands this world, someone who fits in." But Zayn didn't flinch. "I don't want someone who fits in. I want someone who sees me for who I am, not for the image I project." As his world began to unravel, so did his relationship with Amira. She could see the toll it was taking on him, the endless conversations with his family and friends about their future. The pressure was suffocating him, and it was starting to suffocate her too. She knew that the challenges they faced wouldn't just disappear. They would only grow stronger. One evening, as they sat in a quiet cafe, Amira could feel the weight of his silence. He had been distant again, lost in thought, his fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "What's wrong?" she asked gently, her voice full of concern. Zayn looked up at her, his eyes tired but full of determination. "Amira, I'm not going to let go of this, of us, but I need you to understand something. The people around me, they don't see what we have, and they're not going to make it easy for us." Amira's heart tightened. "I don't want to be the reason you lose your friends, Zayn, or your family. I can't ask you to choose between them and me." He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "You're not asking me to choose. I am. This is my choice, Amira, and I choose you." Tears welled up in Amira's eyes. She had feared this moment for so long, the moment where the weight of their worlds would tear them apart. But as Zayn spoke, as he looked at her with such sincerity, she realized that love, real love, was worth every fight, every challenge. "I choose you too, Zayn," she whispered. And in that moment, everything else faded away. The judgment from others, the expectations, the pressures of their different worlds, all seemed insignificant compared to the strength of their connection. They knew there would be more obstacles ahead, more challenges, but for the first time in a long time, they both felt ready to face whatever came their way, together. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty, but also with a sense of peace neither Zayn nor Amira had felt before. They had chosen each other, and now, together, they would face whatever came next. It wasn't going to be easy. The world around them still held its expectations, and there would always be people who would question their relationship. But the love they shared, the connection they had built, was stronger than the judgment they would face. Zayn's life began to change in ways he hadn't anticipated. He started distancing himself from the circles that had once been so important to him. He didn't attend every high society event, and he stopped responding to every phone call from people who wanted him to play by their rules. Instead, he spent his time with Amira, finding solace in the simplicity of their moments together. They would walk through the city streets, hand in hand, talking about everything, their hopes, their dreams, and their fears. Amira had become his anchor, the person who made him feel alive in a way that no amount of wealth ever could. Amira, for her part, began to feel a newfound sense of freedom. The man she had fallen in love with was not the man she had initially thought he was. He wasn't just a millionaire, someone who would look at her through the lens of money and status. He saw her for who she truly was, and he made her feel like she was enough, like she mattered. For the first time in her life, she felt valued not for what she could offer, but for who she was. Their love wasn't without challenges. Zayn's family still questioned his choices, his friends still didn't understand. But Zayn was unwavering. He would not let anyone dictate his happiness. When his mother called him one evening, pleading with him to reconsider, Zayn was firm in his response. "I love her, Mom, and I'm not going to apologize for that. You either accept it or you don't." And for the first time in a long time, his mother was quiet. The world around them slowly began to accept that Zayn and Amira were a couple, and though it wasn't easy, their love continued to grow. Weeks turned into months, and eventually Amira moved in with Zayn. Their apartment, though far from the luxury Zayn had grown accustomed to, was filled with warmth and laughter. It wasn't the grand estate, the lavish dinners, or the fancy cars that defined their lives now. It was the quiet moments of shared understanding, the simple joy of being with someone who truly cared. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of their apartment, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of pink and gold, Zayn turned to Amira. "I don't need all the things I thought I wanted," he said quietly. "I just need you." Amira smiled, her heart swelling with love. "I feel the same way," she whispered. And in that moment, they knew. The world around them could change, and people could judge them all they wanted, but their love was theirs, and nothing would ever take that away. Zayn had found his peace, not in his wealth, but in Amira's love. And Amira, who had once doubted that someone like Zayn could ever understand her world, had found something more valuable than riches. A love that was real, pure, and true. Together they had built a future that no one could tear apart. Thank you for reading. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to give it a like and share it with your friends. Subscribe to stay updated for more emotional and heartfelt stories. And if you've ever faced a love that defies the odds, leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts.